also known as Fro from the forums. He has a YouTube channel called Game Boy Guru, and he can be found as Metal Fro on the website RF Generation. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Awesome. So what I'd like to ask you about first is a piece of news that you mentioned off air, and that is Thunder Force 4 is coming to the Nintendo Switch.
Yes. Thunder Force 4, the people on the Shmups forum will know this already, but for anyone else listening, Thunder Force 4, aka Lightning Force in the US, is my favorite shmup of all time. So when Sega announced that they were doing this Sega Ages line of games, and they're bringing a handful of titles to the Switch, one of the games that they announced, which surprised me, was Thunder Force 4.
Yeah.
Now, there are rumors going around right now that it is going to be a port, essentially, of the Thunder Force Gold Pack version, which...
Oh, the PC version?
Well, it was on the Sega Saturn, but it was Japan only. And my understanding, I don't own the Gold Packs yet, but my understanding from everything I've read is that that version eliminates the slowdown that's inherent in the Genesis original.
Mm.
And so it would be interesting to go back and play through the game again without that slowdown to help out in certain areas where things get kind of hairy. Either way, it's a huge thing for me because, like I said, it's my favorite shoot 'em up of all time. Having the ability to play that on HD TV without a lot of other stuff, and also take it on the go without having to lug a Sega Nomad with me would be fantastic.
So I wanted to learn a little bit more about your thoughts on the Switch itself, being the Game Boy Guru. What do you think of the console?
I love it. I lucked out and I actually got one on launch day, and I just think it's a great console. It's not as powerful as the PS4 or the Xbox One, but it's Nintendo being quintessential Nintendo. Really, since the Super NES days, or past the Super NES days, Nintendo has not been the leader of the pack, so to speak, in terms of raw power or sales or any of that stuff, with a couple of exceptions.
Mm-hmm.
The Wii was a runaway hit, but by and large, they've never been the guys leading the charge in terms of sheer processing power and graphics and all of that. But what Nintendo has done has been unique experiences and things like that. And so the Switch, I really feel, is just one of the best things that they've done in a long time. And this is coming from a guy who owns a Wii U and who loves the Wii U,
Mm-hmm.
and has put a lot of time into that and has really enjoyed that. But with the Switch, I feel like they finally got that sweet spot.
Oh yeah, I agree. I have a Wii U, and I play it about 1/10 of the amount of time I play the Switch.
Yeah. And I mean, I put a lot of time into the Wii U from the time that I got it until right about when the Switch came out. And I've only booted it up a couple of times since then. I plan to go back because I've still got some games I need to finish up. But the Switch has, until recently, dominated my time in gaming. When I got my Switch and I got Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild last year, I played through it twice and I put almost 400 hours into it, just because I was so captivated with it.
Yeah, and I think from a shmup player's perspective, what actually got me really on board with the Switch was, I remember when it initially came out, I was like, I was kind of thinking about maybe I wanted to get it or not. And then I noticed, I can't remember what shmup, but some shmup came out on it, a Neo Geo shmup, and I realized you could flip the screen vertically.
Yes.
And then something clicked in my head. I was like, oh my god, a handheld you can play vertical shmups on. Because for years I've been trying to pull that off. Like, I have a Vita and I modded it to play Final Burn Alpha games and stuff. But the screen, there's no easy way to play them in vertical mode. But with the Switch you can.
Yeah. Now, there were a handful of games on the PSP that would do that. Like the Capcom Classics Collection. There was 2 of them that came out. And so you had like 1941, 1942, 1943, Varth, and a handful of other games. and those would allow you to play in vertical orientation. Or I want to say there was a couple of Japan-only collections that would allow you to rotate the PSP in that sort of tate mode so that you could play vertically on some shmups that way. But by and large, yeah, all of the stuff that Zero Div has been porting over from Psychio that is vertically oriented.
Mm-hmm. And the controls are a big deal because you can slide off your Joy-Cons and hold them when you flip it sideways. My big problem with the PSP and the Vita was you could flip the console sideways, but you have like the D-pad on the bottom and then the buttons up top, and it's really awkward to try to play that way because your hands are turned all funky. So
yeah, that is definitely an advantage of being able to pull the Joy-Con off, turn the screen vertically, and then play that way for, things like Gunbird and Strikers 1945 and Dragon Blaze, which just came out recently, and stuff like that. So I'm looking forward to sinking my teeth into some of those games on the Switch.
Yeah, I have quite a few of them on the Switch. What I'm really looking forward to and hoping for is that Cave starts putting their games on there. That would make it probably my favorite console if they could do that.
Yeah, that would be amazing if we could get some of those games on the Switch. But I was just looking here a few minutes ago before we started, and there are just under 30 traditional shoot 'em ups on the system on the eShop right now, including either I don't remember if I don't know if you pronounce it Sinemora or Cinemora or whatever.
I don't either.
EX. That got a physical release, but everything else is digital. But once Sega brings Thunder Force 4 over, that's going to be 30 traditional shmups already on a console that's less than a year and a half old. And then, in tandem with that, I was thinking about, I just recently got a PS4, and currently I own 10 games for it, physically. 7 of the 10 games are shmups. Now, I realize that some of those are limited run releases, so it's interesting to me that this far along, we're kind of experiencing a bit of a shmup renaissance, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
Because we sort of had a little bit of that with the 360. Some of them were region-free, some were not. I didn't get a 360 until almost 2 years ago, and so the only ones I've got are the most common ones. I've got Akai Katana and then Raiden Fighters Aces, but most everything else is getting difficult and expensive to acquire. We're in that period right now where there are so many of these games coming out between indie titles, limited run, Play Asia doing some things, and all of that, plus all this stuff on the Switch. There's so many options available for traditional shooter fans, Danmaku fans, people who like the more indie stuff, twin stick shooters, arena shooters. It's all happening.
Yeah, I agree. And another game that came out on the Switch that I was really impressed with was Danmaku Unlimited 3. Have you played that?
I haven't, but I saw that it was on the eShop.
That's an excellent game, and I think what might be helpful for some of our listeners if they're not familiar with it is, even though it came out on mobile, I would not consider it a mobile shmup. It's not one where you use touch controls. It has a full control scheme, and to me it feels like a nice kind of fusion between a cave-style shmup and a Toho. So, if you're a shmup fan, that's the game I play on my Switch the most. If you're a shmup fan and you have a Switch, I'd definitely check it out.
Yeah, I'll have to add that to my list.
So another thing I wanted to talk about is the hardware of the Switch, because I think it's really suited well for playing shmups. And one thing that comes to mind is, before the Switch came out, I actually was kind of a doubter, for sure. And so I decided, rather than getting the Switch, I was going to buy a device called the NVIDIA Shield. Have you heard of that?
Oh, yeah.
And I bought it solely for the purpose of emulating shmups and playing them. And what I found was that was actually not a good idea at all. Because even though it has the same hardware as the Switch, the same graphics cards and everything, the screen is really, really laggy. Extremely laggy. I did some tests, and I would say up to 3 frames of input lag on that display. So it basically made it completely useless for playing video games, in my opinion. So, whereas the Switch, it has a much more responsive screen.
That is definitely one thing I like about the Switch is the screen is fantastic.
Beautiful screen.
I was at the laundromat here a couple weekends ago playing Bayonetta while I was waiting for clothes to dry, and wow, it was just amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. I love handhelds, and being the Game Boy guru, I'm sure that's a really nice bonus for you to be able to use it as a handheld.
Absolutely. And it's funny because I actually play my Switch almost entirely docked because I'm kind of a homebody. But when I do go out, and it's somewhere that I know I'll have opportunity to play my Switch, a lot of times I'll take it with me. If I go visit my parents or whatever, the Switch is
Yeah,
coming.
mine too.
I go to the laundromat, Switch is going with me. I go on a business trip somewhere. I went on a 2-day trip where I spent a couple nights in a hotel for a thing last year, about a year ago, I guess it was, and Switch went with me, and I was playing Legend of Zelda, and, I hooked it up to the hotel TV, and then I was playing it in the car on the way home.
That's awesome.
And, all of that, so...
One topic I kind of wanted to get back to was I wanted to ask you more about Thunder Force 4. I wanted to kind of hear why that stands as your favorite shmup, what aspects of it really attract you.
Boy, there's a lot. It's the first shmup that I went out and purchased with my own money when I got my Sega Genesis. Some while after I got my Genesis, I think it was KB Toys, and my parents, we were out shopping or whatever, and we went there in the mall, and I had money, and I was planning on buying a game, and I saw that, and the cover art jumped out at me. And I was already kind of a casual fan of shoot-'em-ups. I'd enjoyed R-Type 2 and games like that in the arcade, but I hadn't really gone hardcore into the genre. But that game jumped out at me on the shelf, and so I picked it up, I looked at it, I looked at the screenshots on the back, I thought, whoa, this looks awesome. So I bought it, I took it home, and absolutely fell in love with it. The graphics are amazing for the Sega Genesis, probably some of the best on the system. The soundtrack is phenomenal, and I can't remember the primary composer's name right now, but absolutely stunning work. And my understanding is that Technosoft actually wrote their own sound engine for the Mega Drive or the Genesis when they were doing game production. They didn't use Gems, I think was the name of the sound engine. That was kind of what Sega provided to everybody.
Oh, really?
As like the development kit and that. And so that's why like a lot of the early games that you hear, and even some of the later games by smaller publishers, kind of have that samey sound to them because everybody's using this Gems Genesis sound engine. But my understanding is Technosoft wrote their own, and so that's why Technosoft games have such a distinctive sound on the Genesis. It's kind of like Technosoft's audio prowess on the Genesis is sort of like what Sunsoft did on the NES. And so what they did in Thunder Force 4 was really the culmination of all that they had done up to that point. And I know a lot of people love Thunder Force 3, and some hail that as the best in the series. The Thunder Force 3, Thunder Force 4 debate is kind of like the Mega Man 2, Mega Man 3 debate.
Oh, I see.
I'm squarely in the Thunder Force 4 camp by a long distance, and the soundtrack is one of the reasons. The first time I made it to stage 8 and heard the song Metal Squad, and I was just sitting there with my jaw on the floor going, there's heavy metal coming out of my TV from my Sega Genesis. What is this magic? What sorcery is this?
Shmup soundtracks definitely make a difference when you're playing.
Absolutely. And as a big music fan myself, that captivated me. And so that was a part of it. The other thing was I really felt like the level design, the cool enemies, everything about the game I just liked, other than, the scratchy voice samples and that. But that's something that you can forgive when you've got the awesome graphics and the cool design aesthetics, wicked bosses,
right,
awesome soundtrack, killer gameplay that ramps up in difficulty and then also scales, because you can go easy difficulty and still play through the whole game, or you can run it all the way up to, I think it's Maniac or Manic or whatever.
Yeah.
And just absolutely get murdered. Just everything about the game spoke to me, I guess. And it's funny because once I reached adulthood, one of my first jobs I was working, I actually took my home computer I had at the time. I hooked up my Genesis to my old TV that I had, and I did that in my office, and I beat the game, and then I hooked the Genesis up via the headphone jack to the line-in on my sound card, and I made custom recordings of the entire soundtrack.
Oh, nice. Is there a sound test mode?
Yeah, there is.
Okay.
And if you beat the game, then you go into the sound test. There are 10 additional tracks that aren't in the game, and they're the omake tracks, and they're pretty much all fantastic too. So I actually did a thing where I recorded all of these songs to my computer in wave format, and generally like a 2-loop and then a fade out. And I did all this editing myself. And then because the files were so huge, I didn't have a way to take them to the office with me to burn them to a CD, because we had a single speed CD burner, one of the early ones that was, $500-600 or whatever it was at the time. And so I compressed those down to like the early MP3 format, put them on a zip disk, took them to work, then converted them back to wave, because that's the format that the burning software needed, and then burn those to a CD so I could actually listen to the music on a CD player.
That's awesome.
That's how much the soundtrack to that game has influenced me over the years. And so, it's my favorite shmup. It's probably my favorite game soundtrack of all time. I've spun it in multiple vehicles across multiple years. I still have the CD that I made, and I actually used the old, you remember I don't know, you might not be old enough, but there was an emulator for DOS called Genesis.
Mm-hmm.
That was the Genesis emulator that I used, and I went in and played the game and took pictures of different levels and things, and I made kind of a collage of different backgrounds and things, the game, to use as like the tray card on the back.
Oh,
and
that's
then I took
cool.
I took a screenshot of the title screen and used that as the art for the front of the CD, and then added my own text on the bottom, because on the box it says Lightning Force, and then the subtitle is Quest for the Dark Star. And so I used the company's Photoshop and did some funky stuff with the text and everything, and totally made my own, I completely geeked out and made my own deal on the bottom there. So it would have that. It was like in flames. And anyway.
Do you have those images still?
Sadly, the images are long gone.
Oh.
Because the Photoshop files that I made at the time have probably been lost to time, unless they're still sitting on one of the zip disks down in the basement. But I still have the CD and the jewel case that I made with my custom prints.
That would be awesome if you had those images. I could throw them up on the post and people could check them out.
Yeah. The closest thing I've got is I was attempting to do a sort of a treatise on Thunder Force 4 on an old blog that I ran years ago. And so I may still have some of those pictures of, the actual CD and the case and that stuff that I showed to say, hey, I did this. But that's probably the closest thing I have.
Your story makes me laugh, because I did the exact same thing with my Super Nintendo, but I was a kid, and so I wasn't as savvy with audio equipment and things like that. And so I made these lo-fi recordings of like Mega Man X, Donkey Kong Country and stuff, and give them out to my friends, and they are so bad. The audio quality was horrible, because I took it straight from, the AV out, and I put it in an old tape recorder that I had, so they were on tape, and it was just grainy and horrible. But I know I did the exact same thing you did. That's why it makes me laugh.
Yeah, that sounds like me when I was a kid, taking the family tape recorder, putting it up next to the TV, and recording TV theme songs to listen back to.
Yeah. another thing you mentioned is that on your website you ended up recently winning a Shmup contest. I'm interested to hear more about this.
Oh, well, it wasn't too recently. I mean, it was December of 2014. RF Generation, where I contribute an article every month, they have a monthly playthrough where they'll pick a game, and then there are a couple of guys that choose the games, and then anyone who wants to participate can go through and play through the game through the course of the month. But then in December, because people are busy with Christmas stuff and getting together with family and all of that, they generally pick shorter games that are much easier to kind of get through, more traditional old school games, and they'll do score competitions and things like that. And so in December of 2014, they did a shoot 'em up contest, and there were multiple games that they did. And at the time, they were actually doing 2 games a month, a modern game and a retro game. And so in the shmup contest, there was a retro shmup and then a more modern shmup that they did each week of the month, like for the first, I think, 3 weeks or whatever. And then the last week was sort of a clean up your scores and, try to improve on any one game that your score is low or whatever.
Yeah.
And there's a thing in the rules where the bottom 2 scores get thrown out.
Oh, elimination style.
Yeah, I mean, the bottom 2 scores of yours get thrown out, and so then everything else that you've participated in, they're only aggregating your highest scores. Well, it turns out that during the course of the month, of the games that they picked, I think there were 2 that I didn't have at the time. One of those was Odomedius on the 360, because I didn't have my 360 yet. And then the other one I was missing, sadly, was UN Squadron, because I didn't have that for the Super NES yet. But the other games were Gradius on the NES, Lightning Force, of course, and then on the modern side was R-Type Final. What was it? Sin and Punishment Star Successor on the Wii.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, and then Cyanide on the original Xbox. And so I had all of those games, and I got the high score in all of those except for Sin and Punishment Star Successor, because there was someone who was participating who that was one of their favorite games, and so they had already played through and beat the game, and so they dominated on that score. But the other 5 or 6 games or whatever, I was the high score player. And in fact, on several of those games, I was the high score player by a decent margin. And so when it all came down to ranking and all of that, because I was the high score holder in all but one of the games I played, and my lowest 2 scores were the 2 games I didn't own, effectively 0 score,
Yeah.
I won the competition.
That's awesome.
Yeah, and so the guys who run that every year, they do this cool thing where they always make up some kind of trophy for the winner. And so for that competition, they took this old plastic wrestling belt, and it's got this cool thing. It's like a WWF belt, and it has in the middle, the WWF logo is on this thing that spins. And so what he did was he bought this awesome kind of die-cast futuristic plane that looks like something you would see in a shmup, like a ride-in or something like that, and hot glued it to the WWF logo so that you'd have this spinning futuristic plane on this wrestling belt.
Oh, you've got to show us a picture of that.
Yeah, I've got a couple of pictures of that somewhere, so I'll have to send you one.
So what was when you were doing that competition, would you say, I just kind of want to learn more about, did that give you a lot more motivation to play these games and kind of push yourself for higher scores?
At the time, it didn't, because I was busy with other stuff in my life. I was doing foster care, and my job kept me really busy. And I was also, trying to work my way through all the games in the Wii U library that I had. So unfortunately, it didn't keep me going in the shmups. And, I kind of have always gone back and forth. I get really into the genre for a while, and then I get burnt out for a little while and kind of put it away and go on to other things gaming-wise. But I always come back to it. And so, that's one of the things that I'm looking at now is I'm trying to get myself into a mindset where I look at my collection, I have all these shoot 'em ups now. I need to start playing through a lot of these games that I've only just given a little bit of time to.
Right.
So I've been actually seriously working on some stuff. Like I got Raiden 5 on the PS4, and I credit fed through that. But I put a bunch of time into Raiden 4 on the 360. Really like that game. I've got Darius Burst Chronicle Saviors on PS4, and have been putting a bunch of time into the Chronicle mode on that. Once I actually go to the eShop and buy this stuff, I'm going to get some of those Psycho shmups. I'm looking forward to putting some time into Dragon Blaze. I've had Strikers 1945-2 forever because that was one of the first Saturn imports that I bought. But it'll be nice to kind of get back into that, and like a proper version of Gunbird instead of Mobile Light Force on the PlayStation. It'll be nice to play a proper version of Gunbird on a console. And so I'm trying to kind of get back into that mindset where I'm going to start focusing on some of these games again. And that kind of leads me into something that I'm actually working on that I think will be announced shortly on RF Generation. Is I'm going to start doing a monthly shmup playthrough on the site. So in addition to the regular playthroughs that happen, that the guys who do that and have the podcast and all of that do every month, I'm going to be running a shmup playthrough where I'll pick a shmup, or I'll do a poll and say, hey, which of these games do we want to play? And we'll start playing through some of these games. And kind of going back to an earlier point, is right now is a great time to be a fan of the genre because there are so many options. There are lots of ways via, PS4, Switch, 360, Steam, etc., to play a lot of these classic games. Plus, you've got a wealth of games from the 8, 16, and 32-bit eras that are available. Some of them are expensive, but for guys like me who've been collecting these things for the better part of 20 or 30 years, it's a good excuse to go back to these games and start playing through them, and also introducing people to some of these games that may not have played. Doing high score competitions, not for prizes necessarily, but just for the fun, and either just as a way to challenge one another or bragging rights or whatever.
Yeah.
And so, I'm sitting in my game room here, and I'm looking at my shelf of Genesis games. I haven't put serious time into Biohazard Battle, but that's a shooter that I know is a really good one for the system. So I want to go back and really put some time into that. Or Insector X,
Yeah.
It's not one of the best shooters on the system, but it's solid. And I know it's one that, I put a little bit of effort into that. I could probably once see that, things like that.
That's great to hear you're doing these monthly playthroughs. I like the idea of more like just a general gaming website or a retro collecting website, kind of giving special attention to the genre, more exposure that way. So I wanted to know, when you do your playthroughs, are you going to be, what's kind of the focus of the playthrough? Is it more of just showing off the game and kind of talking about its mechanics? Or are you going to try and do like 1 credit, hardcore, no death runs? I'm just curious to learn more about that.
Sure. Well, for me, a lot of it is just going to be a way for me to, I don't want to say force myself because that's the wrong word, but, encourage me to play through these games, but then also to try and help to build a bit of a community. I know that the Shmups forum is already out there, and there are a lot of hardcore players there. I consider myself to be someone who exists somewhere in the ether between a hardcore player and a filthy casual, so to speak. I'm not a huge bullet hell Danmaku kind of guy. I kind of enjoy those games to an extent, and I admire them for what they do, but I've never quite been able to completely wrap my head around them. And so something like this will allow me to maybe dip my toe into the water a little bit more and dig into those games a little bit more, because that's the game we're playing this month. And if I'm going to be intelligent enough to talk about it with other people on the website, I'm going to have to dig my heels in and actually play it. And so that will encourage me to become more knowledgeable about the genre and about some of these games that maybe I haven't put much time into.
Mm-hmm.
Plus, as someone who's a little bit more of a old school Twitch shoot 'em up kind of guy, then that's a great excuse for me to go back also and play through some of these games that I haven't put enough time into, or I've purchased and they've just kind of languished on my shelf.
Yeah.
So it really serves a dual purpose. Plus, with all the indie games and all the stuff on Steam, it's just going to be a good opportunity to start discovering more of these games as well.
And I think as far as, being a filthy casual, I just think that's funny you say that.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of ways you can even look at that term, because as far as your investment in the genre, there's no doubt I would consider you a hardcore shmup fan. I mean, you're on the forums, You're making content, you're talking about them. You obviously have a lot of knowledge of the development of Thunder Force 4. So I know what you're saying, though. A lot of people, I think, would only consider you a hardcore player if you're going out there and trying to, one credit, Dononpachi or, some of these more difficult Battle Garega, things like that.
Right. If I'm not doing a 1cc of Mushihime-sama or something like that, playing on the PCB, not main, but on the PCB,
Right.
I'm not hardcore enough, And at the end of the day, I don't care about that. I mean, if I was going to go for a world record in something, yeah, I want to play on original hardware as much as possible, or maybe I have to because that's the rules of that competition. But in terms of just playing and enjoying the genre, let's do that however we can.
Right.
And that's one of the things that I'm going to encourage with this project is whether you own the actual game, and of course a lot of people will because RF Generation is a collector community,
Mm-hmm.
but even if you don't, there's still emulation or, like I say, Steam in some cases, the Switch or the PS4 for some of these digital-only titles and those kinds of things. And so for some of those things, there are multiple ways or multiple avenues that you can play some of those games.
Absolutely. And one thing that I've noticed when I've been recommending some of my more casual gamer friends to shmups is sometimes I have difficulty with recommending shmups to them, like certain styles of shmups like bullet hells, because the problem that comes up for me is I feel like some of the console ports of these shmups are actually not that very friendly to beginners at all. They don't, as opposed to playing on emulation where you can use things like save states. So whenever I recommend my friends, I say, listen, use shmup main, use save states, get your feet wet that way, because I think a lot of it can be really frustrating if you're just playing on, let's say, the Saturn port of Dononpachi. There's no stage select. It's just put in the credits and go, and then if you get blown up in 3 seconds, you get really discouraged. So
yeah, I experienced that myself back when I was collecting for Saturn a number of years ago, and I first bought the Saturn port of the original Donpachi, and myself being still relatively new at the time to Danmaku games, and that's kind of an early example, but not understanding the idea of a hitbox that wasn't the whole ship, because that's what I grew up with, is traditional shooters where that's the case. So and then not quite understanding the concept of dodging these giant bullet curtains and huge patterns and things. And even though the original Donpachi is a little bit tame, dealing with the slowdown in the Saturn version and then maybe making it 2 levels in and dying 3 times quickly on a boss or something like that because I've run out of bombs and I don't know what I'm doing. And then the announcer guy tells me, you need more practice. It's like, shut up. Let me play the game. But yeah, I mean, they can be, I don't want to use the word impenetrable, but they can be difficult to kind of get beyond that initial, wow, this is hard, I have no idea, going that direction, Shmup Mame or something like that, where you can do save states or Raspberry Pi or whatever it is, where you can kind of do that, really work at a game so you can kind of learn the levels and practice it enough to where you're comfortable with that style, you're comfortable with the games throwing at you, you understand the mechanics and all of that. That's a great idea, and I think that's something that I may have to do for some of the titles that are a little bit daunting to me.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was going to ask you, have you played any of the more recent cave games like Death Smiles or the recent Dodonpachi Tsudaioju or however it's pronounced?
No, I have not played SDOJ yet. I don't have Death Smiles. It's on my list because there was a US release. And I know, is it SDOJ
Hmm.
that is region free?
Yes.
Okay, I know some of the 360 shmups were region free and some of them weren't. But yeah, I mean, with Steam and with all the Dojin scene on PC and all of that, there's a ton of stuff that I'm going to be able to play and that we're going to be able to choose from. And so it's not just going to be all classic shooters or all bullet hell. You know, there's going to
Hmm.
be arena shooters, there's going to be twin stick. We're probably going to get into borderliners and things like there's probably going to be some run and gun
Right.
to change things up a little bit, some rail shooters like Sin and Punishment Star Successor because that game is so good.
Yeah, and I'd just like to say, can we have a moment of silence for the genre of rail shooters? Because I love rail shooters, but they don't seem to be made anymore. It's terrible.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting because there was a flood of them on the Wii because of the Wiimote and that accessibility.
Hmm.
You know, everything from just crap like Mad Dog McCree, which I love because it's so terrible, or arcade ports like what was it? Um,
I know they had House of the Dead, but that's more of a light gun game, but
right. There's House of the Dead, but I was trying to think if there's a couple more, or of course, you know, Sin and Punishment Star Successor. There's a few more that are like that though, that are kind of rail shooters. What was another one? It was like Counterforce. It was a really terrible budget title.
I'm surprised no Panzer Dragoon on the Wii.
Oh, see, and that's another one that I would definitely love to play because I've got Panzer Dragoon and Zwei on the Saturn, and then I've got Orta on the Xbox, which is amazing. Being able to include those kinds of games because they may not have the design concepts and meet all of the, you know, check all the boxes, so to speak, of being a true purist sort of shmup,
Yeah.
but they're closely enough related that being able to do a game like that once in a while, throw that in the mix to kind of change things up. It'll keep things fresh. You know, same with throwing a Metal Slug or a
Yes, absolutely.
Contra Hardcore or something like that into the mix once in a while will help to keep things fresh and also maybe bring in some people that find the more traditional shmups a little bit more difficult to approach.
Yeah. Just from my own perspective, I'm a huge traditional shmup fan, obviously, but sometimes I do wish the more hardcore scene would embrace things like the rail shooters, the run and guns, simply because they don't really have a home, and someone needs to play those things competitively, right? So
Sure.
I would love to see top level players playing stuff like Sin and Punishment or Panzer Dragoon or going after even like Star Fox 64. That would be awesome.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I mean, like I played through Star Fox Zero on the Wii U here a couple of years ago when that came out, and despite some jankiness with the controls, I thought it was great.
Me too.
You know, and I know there are some like Sarah Flash who does Bullet Heaven on
Oh yeah,
YouTube.
I've seen that.
He features run and guns and borderline games from time to time on the channel, and so you know that's cool to be able to have that kind of peripherally within the genre. But most of what they stick to, of course, is traditional shooters. But yeah, you know that's one of the reasons why I want to include those things is because it has similar kind of Twitch gameplay
Mm-hmm.
and fast action, and it's just jump in and blow away
Yeah.
stuff.
And I feel like this is a little bit of a tangent, but I have nowhere else to talk about this, so I'm going to talk about it on my own podcast. I got the Wii U actually to play Star Fox Zero because I'm a massive, massive Star Fox fan.
Oh wow.
And I was actually a little annoyed about the reception the wider gaming press kind of gave the game because I felt like, as someone who's a hardcore Star Fox player, if there is such a thing, I meddled it, beat it on expert mode and everything. I felt like Zero was made for people like me, people who like really difficult, intricate gameplay. And then I feel like the casual audience, with the control scheme and everything, was just completely turned off. And the problem with that is now I don't think we'll ever get another traditional Star Fox game.
Yeah, I don't know. It's hard to say. I mean, one of the things that may have turned off some people outside of the Wii U gamepad requirement and using that for the aiming might have been the fact that it was Platinum Games who did it. And of course, Platinum Games titles are notoriously difficult and can be hard to really sink your teeth into unless you love that sort of beat you in the face kind of challenge.
Right. Which I think the shmup audience does.
Right. I enjoy that to a point because I like most everything that Platinum has done that I've played. Big fan of Bayonetta 1 and 2 on the Wii U. Bought it again for the Switch, been playing through the first one. My favorite Wii U game was actually The Wonderful 101, which they did.
Yeah, that's a great
I
one.
absolutely love that.
Yeah, that's a great game.
But I think it might have been a combination of, A, people didn't see it as anything new or fresh outside of what they felt was the gimmicky control scheme, because essentially it's kind of a quasi remake of Star Fox 64 in a way.
Right.
And so they were like, well, it's not a new story or it's not a new experience. It's just more of the same, but with a prettier veneer on it. And then you add in that Wii U gamepad control scheme, which a lot of people didn't like. And when I first started playing it, I had a hard time wrapping my head around it. And I did not come from the Star Fox fandom. You know, I'd played the original on the Super NES. I'd admired the one on the 64, but I didn't have a 64 until well into my adulthood. And so, you know, I didn't come from that. And I never played either of the GameCube games, even though I know they were different and not traditional kind of full Star Fox shooter experiences. But Zero, it might be partially because of the gamepad thing, because I actually appreciate what Nintendo did with that. And it may be partially because I enjoy Platinum games, but I actually rather enjoyed that game. And I think you're right. I think it got judged a little bit too harshly.
Yeah.
And I think not enough people gave it a chance because of those factors.
The reason why I never had a problem with the motion controls and everything is because I love arcade games. I love playing in arcades, and it felt like an arcade experience almost using that gamepad. Like LA Machine Guns, you know, the big machine gun when you go in the arcades.
Yeah.
It kind of reminded me of like an arcade style gaming experience, so I loved it. But I know a lot of people just want to use their PS4 controllers or whatever, so I guess I've loved it, but
yeah.
I was interested also to learn more about your collecting, because it sounds like you have one hell of a collection.
Yeah, like I said, I was looking through my collection on RF Generation, and I saw that I now have 3,000 games as of this last week. But then I was kind of feeling pretty proud of myself, and then somebody else posted a couple days later, yeah, I just hit 9,000.
Damn.
So I'm like, well, I've got a little ways to go if I want to go that hardcore. But, you know, my thing is I've been buying up inexpensive PS2, Xbox, GameCube, Wii, PS3, and 360 games as much as I can, and then filling in holes where I can for other systems. Excuse me, like NES, Genesis. I picked up a bunch of Atari cartridges, 2,600 carts last year. You know, I added a 7,800 to my library toward the end of last year and got a handful of games. Of course, my Switch, I now have, I think, almost 20 physical releases for. And I've got a buddy out in California that I call him my hunting buddy, because he is like a thrift store, secondhand shop wizard, because in his area of California, not everything has been completely picked over yet. And so he goes out to these shops, and then he'll text me about something and say, hey, do you need this? It's like $2 or whatever. And I'll quickly check my list, and it's like, yeah, I don't have that one yet. Set that aside for me. And then that's something I do on my YouTube channel is he'll send me a box of this stuff. And it's usually a giant box full of games. And, you know, he sent me some Skylanders and some different things, controllers, and, you know, a few odds and ends. And then occasionally I'll text him when I'm out at the thrift stores or the pawn shops or whatever, and I'll say, hey, I found this. And
that's awesome, because you guys are quite a bit away from each other. He's in Cali, you're in Omaha, right?
Yeah, in Lincoln.
Sorry. Lincoln.
That's okay. Yeah. But it's still cool that, we can kind of communicate like that back and forth and, show each other what we're collecting or what we've picked up. And, I just bought this game and it was like $2 at the thrift store. And, you look online and it's like, oh, that's like a $20 game, that kind of a thing. And
Yes.
it's fun.
It's fun to do that. I do that myself sometimes.
It's the thrill of the hunt.
And what was the first system that you really started digging in and getting a bunch of games for?
The first system that I think I started to actually collect for when I began to kind of get into the hobby more seriously was the original PlayStation. And it's funny because I don't have that terrible many original PlayStation games, but that's the one that I started to buy up games for because, number one, there were more than a handful of decent shmups that came out in the US for the PlayStation. And then, I kind of started with the Saturn, although even back when I started to collect for it, stuff was a bit more expensive just because there wasn't as much of it. That kind of spurred me to go back and start collecting a little bit more for the Genesis. I bought a lot of loose carts. I kind of wish I had stuck more to boxed complete games on that. But, I got a decent library of that. But I would say in the last 3 to 4 years, what has really allowed me to ramp up the collection is things like Goodwill and pawn shops and those things. And then just me being savvy about watching internet prices and things like that so I can start picking up games cheaper and kind of understanding the value of these things. I got into collecting for the PSP when that came out. When I got my PSP, I started to buy up games for that when I saw them go on sale or, when I saw them used cheap enough. And then here the last 3 years, it's been tons of PS2, tons of Xbox. I've probably doubled my GameCube collection. I didn't have that many GameCube games, even though that was the first system I bought during that generation. I didn't buy a ton of games for it, but I've probably doubled that collection in the last 2 years just because of Goodwill and thrift stores and pawn shops and scoring good deals on things.
Would you say in your local area in Lincoln, you're still able to go to pawn shops and find some good video game deals and things like that?
Some. I've only been in Lincoln for a few months, but here in the state, the area where I was living before, I was one of a handful of more hardcore collectors. There might have been 10 to 15 of us within about a 60 to 80 mile radius. Serious hardcore collectors. And so there were 2 retro shops that opened up in the area where I was living before. Plus there were 2 Goodwills, another thrift store, and 2 pawn shops that I would frequent. And then, of course, garage sales and stuff like that. And so between all of those avenues combined, plus like I said, being savvy on
Mm-hmm.
eBay, buying duplicates of things that I had that I knew I could trade because I found them at garage sales or whatever. And just starting to do some of those things, has really allowed me to grow the collection.
So I wanted to ask you, with your channel, Game Boy Guru, I was wondering, do you have a pretty extensive knowledge of shmups on the Game Boy? I know isn't there a Popping Twinbee game on the Game Boy?
There is Poppin' Twinbee. I want to say that was Japan only, or maybe Japan and Europe. I don't think we got a US release. In fact, I think it was Japan only. But we did get a handful of good shmups on the Game Boy in the US. There was Nemesis, which was kind of a sort of a remix of Gradius and that.
Mm-hmm.
Then there was Gradius Interstellar Assault, which is a completely original title for the Game Boy. Excellent game, awesome soundtrack. There's decent conversion of Burai Fighter that was on the NES from Taxan or Naxat Soft. There's Battle Unit Zeoth, which is sort of a mech shoot 'em up
Oh, nice.
that has a screen that can scroll up and down and stuff. It's not super fantastic, but it's a solid game. And then there's cool stuff like Quarth, which is like a puzzle shmup.
Super Mario Land in a way. Two
Oh,
shmup shit ages.
one of my favorite, still one of my favorite Game Boy games, the original Mario Land. I'm trying to think of there's a conversion of R-Type for the Game Boy that's solid. There are a handful of Japanese titles, Japan only or Japan and Europe, like Sagaya, aka Darius 2. It's not really Darius 2, it's sort of a Darius and Darius 2 kind of remix on the Game Boy. That never left Japan, unfortunately. There's a game called Zaz, I think, that is supposed to be one of the better Japanese exclusive shmups on the Game Boy. There's a couple of Game Boy shmups that never left Japan that it's a good thing they didn't because they were terrible. But we didn't get a ton of shooters on the system, but we got some. Aerostar is an interesting one that's kind of got like a mechanic where your ship is on the ground and you kind of jump from platform to platform in a way, but it's still a shooter. Or even Nintendo put out Solar Striker, which is unremarkable, but totally solid and a fun game. Very old school
Mm-hmm.
Star Force type of run-of-the-mill basic old school arcade shooter, but fun.
And being the Game Boy Guru, I was curious, what is your favorite Game Boy game?
Ooh, that's a hard one. I mean, I always go back to the original Super Mario Land. That's a longtime favorite. I try to pull it out at least once a year and play through and beat it because I can usually sit down and do it in one sitting. I really like Gargoyle's Quest. My usual absolute go-to is always going to be Super Mario Land.
That is a fantastic game.
Even though, objectively speaking, the sequel is a better game, but I have so much nostalgia for the original that's always my go-to.
I agree. I actually prefer Super Mario Land 1 more. And one thing I would love to see, this is for the internet out there, is a ROM hack of Super Mario Land 1 where it's just shmup stages. Super Mario Land shmup. That would be awesome.
That would be amazing if they took the template from the underwater stage and then the airplane stage and just
went crazy with it.
Oh, that would be incredible. I would love that.
Yeah, I actually considered trying to learn like ROM hacking just to make that happen, but didn't quite have the motivation.
Yeah. To paraphrase the movie, ROM hackers of the world unite.
Right.
And give us a Super Mario Land shmup.
Returning to the topic you mentioned earlier about, being a more casual player, but definitely a hardcore collector, no doubt about that.
Yeah.
Do you have any interest in some of the more hardcore aspects of shmups, like, watching the super plays or things like Stunfest and kind of the higher level gameplay that people can get really invested in? Is that something that appeals to you, or is it just kind of a little too much?
Yes and no. I find some of that to be a little bit intimidating because I watch these super plays. I've seen some of them on YouTube, and I just kind of sit there with my jaw on the floor thinking, there's no way I'll ever be that good. And part of it is that I'm my own worst critic, and I know that my big thing is I have to put the time into a game in order to get that good. My backlog at this point is so ridiculous that, I'm not going to spend 300-400 hours on any one shoot 'em up, for example, to get that good. For me, it's more about just enjoying the gameplay and the aesthetics and all of that. But I recently followed the official Cave channel on Twitch, and so I'll probably be watching some of those replays. And yeah, I think I probably, now that I'm going to be doing a more serious project relating to shmups, I'm probably going to go back and start doing some of these things and watching some of these things. Like I watched one the other night from Agro Sky, his group playthrough
Oh,
of
yeah.
Gradius 2 on the Famicom. And that was such a fun thing to watch, and then to listen to the commentary and, all the stuff about the different weapon sets that they were using. And I've watched some of his other stuff too. And
Yeah, I'm sure you've seen his Thunder Force 4 video, that being your favorite shmup.
absolutely.
I just talked to him
Yeah.
about that yesterday.
Yeah. And that was a great playthrough. And I think I watched his Insector X playthrough, I want to say, and his Whip Rush playthrough and some of those. And so, yeah, I mean, some of that stuff I want and need to get into a little bit more seriously, because I'm going to actually be kind of leading the charge,
Right.
so to speak, on this new shmup playthrough project. But some of it is, like I said, I kind of go through hot periods and cold periods with shmups over the years, where I might be hot and heavy about collecting them, but not so much about playing them, just because when I do go through periods where I want to play them, the collection aspect comes into play. So yeah, I think that's an area that I haven't delved into heavily, but I think I'm at a point now where, yeah, I think I'm kind of ready to maybe jump into that stuff a little bit more headfirst.
I think with every person, the great thing about shmups is I think different aspects of a shmup will appeal to people in different ways. Like I got to speak with David in Utah, and the things that always stood out to him in shmups was the art itself, the art of the shmup, the design, the visuals. And for me, I've always been really attracted to kind of high-speed gameplay, those types of things. So I was curious, for yourself, when you see a shmup, what are the aspects of it that jump out to you the most? What parts of them do you appreciate the most, and what other ones are you not as concerned about?
Sure. I mean, graphics are nice when a shmup is at least has a nice aesthetic to it. That's not necessarily the thing that I feel is the most important, but it's certainly a nice feature. The soundtrack sticks out to me because I'm a big music fan.
Me too.
And weapons. A shmup has to have cool weapons, or weapons that are fun to use and fun to power up.
Right.
The first time you go through a full power run in, say, Raiden with either the Vulcan weapon or the super laser weapon, and you get that giant swath of bullets shooting out, or that huge thick blue laser, that's an amazing feeling and achievement in a game like that, with its fast, twitchy gameplay. Or things like Raystorm or Galactic Attack, Ray Force, where you can maximize your lock-on and just take out a whole cadre of enemies at one time. It's a great feeling. And so that kind of gut reaction to being able to take out a whole swath of enemies at once, or to be able to use an amazing weapon like, what's another one?
Radiant Silvergun has the sword. That's one of my favorites ever.
Yeah, and like same thing in something like Chaos Sphere or whatever, where you've got that bullet canceling ability. And I was just trying to think of, on the Genesis, Fire Shark, where you get that flamethrower weapon when it's fully powered up, and it does that sweeping thing back and forth across the screen. Amazing.
You know what is one of my favorite shmup weapons that no one ever really talks about? Is in Axelay, there's this beam weapon that as you hold the fire button, it will rotate. And so the longer you hold B, you can change the direction and angle of your bullets. Have you ever seen that?
Mm. I think I have. I have Axel A, but I haven't put a lot of time into it. That's one of the games that I know I'm going to want to cover on the Shmup project because A, it's fairly common and not super expensive. A lot of people probably already have it, and it's one that I kind of wrote it off
Oh
because
no.
I want to say the vertically scrolling stages, I felt like the Mode 7 effect in those was kind of a gimmick, and I also didn't feel like it was good in terms of perspective because, I'm used to playing
Mm-hmm.
old school, traditional vertical scrolling games. I love my Raiden and Fire Shark and, Vapor Trail and stuff like that. And so with that kind of skewed perspective, it threw me
I
off.
could see that. I try to think of it as F-Zero with guns in those sections because it kind of looks like F-Zero the way it's not fully down. It's more like a 45-degree angle on top of the ship.
Yeah, it's more like Sylphid, but because of the Mode 7 effect, you kind of get that curvature of, especially in that first stage, you kind of almost see the curvature of the planet that you're flying over.
Mm-hmm.
And so that always threw me off. And I always had trouble kind of navigating through the obstacles.
Right.
And I was always running into stuff, and I got
Especially
frustrated
that
with it,
first
and I
stage.
put it away.
Yeah, that first stage sucks. I would say in Axelade, the horizontal, it's definitely a stronger horizontal shmup than it is vertical. But I think that would be a great one to cover on your channel because I think whenever I have friends that are kind of lukewarm on shmups, I say, play Axelade. It's a great introductory shmup to the genre because it's forgiving, it's got really unique, fun mechanics, and I think it's a great shmup overall.
Yeah, so that's a game that I'm definitely going to be including in the playthroughs because A, I need to go back to it and put more time into it, and B, like I say, it's common. A lot of people have it already, and it's one that a lot of people will probably gravitate to. So it'll be a good, like you say, a good introductory shmup for folks who want to kind of jump into the genre a little bit more.
And have you ever done a 1cc run of a shmup?
Yes. What was it? Gosh, it's probably been 8 years ago. I got well, of course, Lightning Force I've done multiple times. That was more than 20 years ago when I was 1cc'ing that regularly just because it was like my favorite.
Mm-hmm.
Here about 8 years ago, I did a fantastic 1cc run of Blazing Lasers on the TurboGrafx. Not long after that, I got a 1cc run of, oh geez, now I'm going to forget. It's on the NES.
Gradius?
No, it's a vert. Crap, I can't think of what it is. It's
Star Soldier?
No, it's the one that's like
My NES knowledge is very weak.
the Greek mythology
Oh!
themed one.
Is that the one that...
It was an arcade game, and then
Yes.
it was ported. I just can't think of what
Is
it's
it
called
Legendary
right now.
Wings?
Yes, Legendary Wings. I see it on the shelf here. Yeah, and then sometime later, I did a 1cc Dragon Spirit on the NES. And so now that I've got the TurboGrafx version, which is supposed to be a little bit closer to or more of an arcade port, I'm kind of looking forward to digging into that one a little bit and seeing if I can 1cc that, because the NES version is surprisingly easy to 1cc.
Oh, is it?
Yeah. I was very shocked at how easy it was. I didn't have to play through it very long. I mean, I'd been working on Blazing Lasers off and on for a few months, and I sat down one day and I said, I'm just going to play this game, and I'm going to see how far I can get. And then when I die and I go through and whatever and run out of continues or whatever it is, I'm going to go back and I'm going to do it again, and I'm just going to keep going because I wanted to at least 1cc something because I hadn't done it in a long time. And I sat down, and I think on my second playthrough, I just blazed all the way through the game.
That's awesome.
Pun intended.
I should have brought this up earlier when you're talking about PSP collecting, but the PSP has some awesome shmup collections on it.
Yeah, unfortunately, a lot of the really good ones are Japan only. Thankfully for me, I bought a couple of those while they were still reasonably priced. Like I have the Parodius collection,
Mm-hmm.
and then I have the PC Engine Best Star Soldier collection, which has, let's see, Superstar Soldier, Final Soldier, Soldier Blade, and then also Star Parodier.
Nice. I haven't actually played that one. The one I always play is the Gradius collection on there.
Oh, that's
It is
fantastic.
amazing. That's my preferred way of playing Gradius. I mean, when I'm not obviously on console, but
Right. And that's the only official release of Gradius Gaiden that we've got in the West. Because of course the PlayStation version was Japan only.
oh, is that right?
Yeah. And the Parodius collection is great because it's got several Parodius games,
Hmm.
including Sexy Parodius,
Yes.
which is just fantastic.
That was actually the first shmup I ever played as
Oh,
an
wow.
adult. Like, I played Raiden a bunch in the arcade cabinets, but I actually wasn't that big of a fan of shmups. And then I remember in high school, I went over to my friend's house. He's like, listen, we've got this really weird game called Sexy Parodius. Okay, there's sexy in the title. We're playing this, so. That was kind of one of the games that sparked my interest in shmups again. Just because of the title, Sexy Parodius.
Yep. Yeah, but I mean, like the two Capcom Classics collections on PSP both feature some different shmups. Some really early ones like 1942, and then newer stuff like Varth in 1941. And like I said, Japan. There's also a Salamander collection, I want to
Oh,
say.
yeah.
And then there's mediocre stuff like Strike Witches. Unfortunately, I didn't buy the original Darius Burst when it was cheap, and so now I'm gonna have to spend a ton of money to acquire that
Oh,
one.
that sucks.
Or like there's the SNK Heroes Shooting something or other. I
Yeah.
don't remember the exact title. That's on the PSP. And then there's a couple of other releases like what do we get in the US? Platypus, which is an interesting game because it's like claymation. It's a
Oh,
claymation
really?
shooter.
I gotta try that.
Yeah. So all the animation is claymation that is kind of then digitized and used. It's a really interesting game. As a shooter, mechanically, it's not fantastic.
Uh-huh.
So don't go in expecting the best shooter on the system, because it's not. But it is fun, and it's an interesting game to play through because of that. So yeah, Platypus is the name of the game.
I kind of got the feeling that you are quite a big fan of the Psycho games. Is that right?
Yes and no. I've kind of had a long-term love-hate relationship with Psycho games
I think everyone does.
because Psycho is such an interesting beast, because especially with their vertical shooters, they all kind of follow this pattern where here's a bunch of stages and we're going to present them to you in random order for the first 3 or 4. So you don't know what you're going to get. Every playthrough is going to be a little bit different. Enemy patterns are not going to be exactly the same every time. They're going to vary a little bit here and there. And so you're going to have to be on your toes. Oh, and by the way, we're not a bullet hell, but there will be some challenging patterns that you'll have to dodge. But in addition to dodging those, there's also going to be super fast bullets
Yeah.
that come and feel like they're heat-seeking, projectiles that are coming your way. And so you're going to die a lot. And so when I first bought Strikers 1945-2 for the Saturn, way back when, I bought it from NCSX when that was more of a thing. And it was a new release, or, well, newish release. It was like a reprint, but it was in the plastic with the spine card
Yeah.
and all that stuff. And I still have that original copy that I bought. And I would sit there and play that. And I love the Flying Pancake. and the awesome sort of homing
There's a
lasers that
lot
it
of charm
has.
to those games, but there's also a lot of jank. So it's like a give and take.
Yeah, it's like they are hard as nails at times, and so they can be super frustrating. But when you get through a level without dying, 3 or 4 times, and you can beat a boss without having to use your entire bomb stock, it's such a triumphant feeling. So, I enjoy the games. Like I say, in a bit more of a casual way. I've never really gone hardcore into the Psycho world, but I own as many of the Western releases that I've been able to get my hands on. So, I've got Strikers 1945 for the PlayStation, which is actually Strikers 1945 2.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's weird how they did that. They repackaged it here in the U.S. It was a budget title. I don't remember who did it right off the top of my head, but Mobile Light Force, which was Gunbird.
Mhm.
I've got Gunbird 2 on the Dreamcast, and I'm trying to think of and then of course Soul Divide on the PlayStation, which is just crap.
Oh, really?
Soul Divide is terrible. It is far and away Psycho's worst shmup.
I think a hidden gem on the PS2 is that there's a Sengoku collection. It has Sengoku Aces 1 and 2 and then Sengoku Blade.
Oh,
Yeah,
nice.
I heard you collect PS2, it sounded like, so keep your eye out for that.
Yeah. Did that get a Western release?
No. I don't think so.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I was going to say, I haven't dabbled into imports on PS2 yet.
Oh, the best
because
ones are imports though.
I know. Well, stuff like a couple of the Dodonpachi games.
Yeah, DOJ, and then Mushihime-sama.
Yeah, and then wasn't there Pink Sweets?
That's on the 360, I believe.
Oh, okay.
I think ESP Raw. I think. Yeah, I don't know how you pronounce that, but
Oh, Esperade.
that's on there. Yes.
That's true. I didn't even think about that. Or is it Esperade or is it Espegaluda?
No, it's Espegaluda. You're right.
Yeah, because I don't think Esperade ever actually got a console port.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I want to say.
You're probably right.
As far as I know, it didn't, unless it snuck into the 360, like on the eShop or whatever in Japan.
Oh, okay.
But I don't think it got an official,
Disc,
physical
disc.
console release.
Okay, so you got me excited because I just remembered something. You're a console collector, so I've got to ask you about the Cave Shooting Collection. Do you have that or have any interest in that?
As much as I would love to have it, I don't yet. And gosh, it's probably stupid expensive at this point.
Here's a funny story about the Cave Shooting Collection. I had a chance to buy it, I would say, right when it came out. But I was dumb because I really wanted it. But I was like, oh, it's going to go down in price. I'll just wait a few years and get it, a few years down the line. And then I steadily watched it raise in price to the point where I couldn't buy it anymore. But
yeah.
Another funny story is I checked on eBay. I was like, oh, I'll get one on eBay. I have some money to burn. Someone was selling the box for $60. The cardboard box. Just the box.
Wow.
I was like, oh, God.
Yeah. It'll go down in price. I'll be able to get it later.
Yeah.
The lies we tell ourselves.
I know. Yeah, that's a regret. I guess I don't have many gaming regrets, but that's one.
Yeah, it's like me and my Saturn collecting. I could have had a whole bunch of high-dollar Saturn games back in the late 90s when they were selling them for peanuts, and I didn't do it,
Mm-hmm. As a collector, I got to ask you, what is your largest collector regret? The deal you didn't jump on and it bit you in the ass?
Honestly, as much of a fanboy of Thunder Force 4 that I am, I didn't buy Thunder Force 5 from a local game store, actually here in Lincoln. When I first lived here almost 20 years ago, I did not buy the original PlayStation Working Designs release of Thunder Force 5 when I could have had it for, I want to say, $20 or $30. I did the same thing. Oh, it'll come down in price.
Uh-huh.
And when I went back to that store later and I thought, no, I better pick it up, it was gone, and I never saw it again in the wild after that.
Oh, that sucks.
Yeah, and so I could have had it for, like I say, $20 or whatever it was, 20, 25, and now it's going for 60, 70, 80, 90 on eBay. And part of the reason that I didn't pick it up is because I was so enamored with Thunder Force 4 that I thought there's no way that Thunder Force 5 will ever live up to the hype.
Oh, I love that. I've done that so many times in my life, so that just makes me laugh.
Yeah, and so kind of psyched myself out thinking I'm going to take this game home and then I'm going to be disappointed with it because it doesn't live up to one of my favorite games of all time, which of course you can never expect that, but at the very least, I should have bought it and just taken it home and expected a solid game, even if it was going to differ from this other thing that I loved. And so that is probably one of my biggest gaming regrets, and certainly my biggest shmup-related regret is that I didn't snap up Thunder Force 5 when I had the chance. It was cheap, and I had the copy physically in my hand. I did not walk out of the store with it that day, and that was dumb.
I have a similar story with Ikaruga on the GameCube. This was back in the day when I was the one person in my entire town who gave a damn about the GameCube. GameCube was still out, and I went to this place called CD World, and they had Ikaruga there for like $15 or something, like a ridiculously low price.
Yep.
I'll come back and get it like a week or two. Then I came back and gone, and then years and years later when I want to get it, it's shot up in price, but
yeah, that's one that I'm after my Thunder Force 5 fiasco, I'll call it, I started to be a little bit more vigilant about those things. And so like with PS2, I picked up Gradius 5 as soon as I found it. I picked up Gradius 3 and 4 as soon as I found it, Sylphid Lost Planet. So when I saw Ikaruga at, I think it was still EB Games at the time in the mall before GameStop did all the rebranding, and they had Ikaruga at that store in the mall for, I think it was $10. I bought it immediately because I knew that if I didn't, I was going to regret it. And
that was a wise choice.
Yeah.
So what are your thoughts on the game itself? Do you like Ikaruga?
I do. I've never been able to get really far in it. I like the polarity concept of it. I think it's a cool mechanic. I've never put enough time into it to get good to the point where I can really get, I'll say, beyond stage 3. That's kind of where I capped out. And, like with everything else, I'd play for a while and I'd get decent at it and I'd get through the first 2 stages and be able to just about get through that on 1 credit. And then I'd get to stage 3 and just bomb out.
Yeah. One thing I really like about the GameCube port, it has that beginner mode. So I remember when I emulate it, because I don't have the disc because I didn't buy it, but when I emulate it, I remember back in the day, I'd emulate it and play the beginner mode and clear the beginner mode and think I was hot shit, and then play the standard mode and oh my god, the game is so much harder.
Yeah. See, and that's one of the things that I always play on whatever the standard difficulty is. The exception being Thunder Force 4. When I first bought that, it kicked my butt 10 ways to Sunday. And so I was like, this game is so hard, but I love it. What do I need to do? And then when I found out about the
difficulty options,
so you can go into the settings, I set it to easy. It's like, oh man, this is so much better. Because then I could go and actually get through a good portion of the game. And so that's how I kind of played through and got to the point where I could 1cc the game. At some point, I should go back and try to 1cc that on the hardest difficulty and kind of work my way back up to that. But yeah, with Ikaruga, I never did the beginner mode. I just always played on the default difficulty because I thought, I'm going to learn the mechanics of this game, I'm going to figure it out, and I'm going to make progress. And I did up to a point, but I capped out at, like I said, like stage 3, I think, where I couldn't get any further.
Yeah,
it's the same thing
game.
With what is it? Fire Shark on the Genesis has, I think it defaults to hard difficulty if you don't change any of the options. So I've always played on hard with that game because that's the default setting. Whereas some people say that that's too difficult and whatever. And I've never been able to 1cc that game, but I've gotten reasonably close because the thing I like about that game is it has such a nice difficulty curve that it doesn't just kind of ease you in the first stage and then stomp you into the ground in stage 2 or 3. It ramps up nice kind of organically. By the time you get to about stage 4 or 5, then you're getting pummeled.
Yeah.
But at least it's prepared you for that pummeling up to that point. Whereas some games like to lull you into a false sense of security in the first stage or two, and then absolutely curb stomp you after that.
What has been the game that had just the biggest wall of difficulty? For me, it was DOJ, Doronpachi Daiju, because the
Yeah.
first 1 and 2 stages, you can, even with some experience, you can kind of get through them maybe by bombing more than you need to and things like that. But that third stage in that game, it's like, okay, you need to be for real, otherwise you're done.
Ooh. For me, I could take the easy road and say, Gunbird 2, just because that kind of helps solidify my love-hate Psycho relationship, just because of the whole random stage order thing and never quite finding my groove. But part of that is just me not putting enough time into it. The game that I think has given me the most difficulty, and one that I find difficult to penetrate and I haven't gone back to it in forever, is Gigawing.
Oh, yeah, that's a great game.
And one of the reasons that I haven't ponied up the cash for Gigawing 2 on the Dreamcast is A, it's expensive, but B, the first game has kicked my butt so much, and I enjoyed it when I played it in the arcade, but that's because I had $5 in quarters and I could just sit there and keep pumping quarters into the machine. But when I got it home on the Dreamcast, and you've got limited continues, and I hadn't quite wrapped my head around the reflecting mechanic enough to where I felt comfortable with it. Yeah, that game is difficult. And I know that there are people who are absolutely monstrous with that game. And because of the ridiculous scoring that you can achieve, that's one that's popular to kind of go back to for strictly scoring.
Do you ever play shmups for score?
I haven't really that much. I mean, that competition that I did in 2014, I did.
Mm-hmm.
But mostly I play to enjoy the games and to a lesser extent to try and complete the game.
Right.
Not necessarily a 1cc, but to at least play through it and see all the stages and kind of get that full experience. Because I'm not much of a completionist when it comes to games. There are a lot of games where you can run around the world and do tons of things and find all the secrets. I'm not one of those guys.
Me neither.
I don't need to be that guy because A, I've got too many games to worry about completing 100%, and B, once I get through the story campaign of a game, unless it's something that I feel compelled to go back to because I'm still enjoying it so much, typically once I'm done with the story campaign, I'll put it aside and move on to something else. So when it comes to shoot 'em ups, and I guess this speaks to my biggest problem with the genre in the sense of, because it's not a story campaign, but it's literally just a series of stages with difficulty caps and things like that, is I play until I hit a wall, and then I'll try to get over that hump. And after a while, if I can't, or I can't figure out a game enough to where I can get past that hard section that's stopping me, typically I'll put it away and I'll go on to something else.
Yeah.
Because, like I say, I've got too many games in my collection at this point to not move on and play something else. What I need to do is maybe put it away temporarily, set it aside for a few hours, and then I'll come back to that in a couple of days or on the weekend or whatever, refocus, and then go back to it to where I can look at it with fresh eyes, or
Right. Exactly.
get a good night's sleep or two in between times so it's not weighing on me, and I can go back to it with a little bit of a renewed vigor and say, okay, I'm going to tackle this thing again, and maybe I'm going to be good at it, maybe I'm going to suck, but at least I'm going to try it and, see if I can do any better. That's been a personal, I guess, failing of mine from a gameplay perspective, is I've never motivated myself enough to go back and stick with it on
Right.
a game, a game-by-game basis.
I think when it comes to playing really difficult shmups, I always think of it like, because I have to kind of contend with this because I'm trying to 1cc a pretty hard one right now, is I've tried to think of it like learning to play an instrument, because there are times where if you're trying to get through a really hard stage with really complex waves and bullet patterns and bosses, it feels impossible. You're like, this is never going to freaking happen. It's just impossible.
Yeah.
And what I try to do is try to remember back to when I was learning to play guitar when I was younger. Like when I'm trying to learn a hard song, I would sit there and try for hours and be like, this is impossible. I can't ever get this song. And the real trick of it was just consistent practice. So that's why I feel like the console shmups really need things like stage select, training mode. So when you get to that third stage that's just a wall, instead of having to waste your time replaying the first two stages to get there, you just go to stage select, practice stage 3, and just work on it, and then when you get tired of it, put it away, come back tomorrow or a day later. That way you can kind of get that practice without wasting all that time replaying the first how many stages you have to play.
Yeah. And see, and that it's interesting that you bring that up because I'm running into that somewhat with Darius Burst Chronicle Saviors on PS4. I've been kind of working on my way through a lot of the Chronicle mode stages, and of course there are tons of them, but the single credit challenges are just absolute murder. Because a lot of those, it's like fixed equipment challenges. This is the weapon set you're going to get and nothing more. Or an original mode type of challenge where you collect weapons and bombs and shields and all this stuff and get as much as you can and then go through it. But you can credit feed your way through those. And the kind of gamer I am, I don't feel a need to go back and replay those challenges to once see them because it's like I've already done that and moving on.
Yeah, I'm that way too.
Whereas with the one credit challenges, a lot of those, I play through some of those and, there are these wall of enemy kind of groups that come up or things like that. It's like if I don't have the right weapon or I don't know where on the screen to be in order to avoid this large swath of enemies that's coming, I'm dying left and right, and my one credit run suddenly is done, and I either continue so that I can see the rest of the stage and try to learn more of it, but then blow my chance to complete the challenge, or I give up and start again and hope that the next time I can get just a little bit further.
Yeah.
But some of those one credit challenges are insane.
I bet.
And it makes me wonder, how the heck do you even get through some of these stages, let alone beat the bosses? Like when I was playing G Darius many years ago, some of those bosses are ridiculous. And so without credit feeding my way through the game, a lot of those later stages, I felt like I would never see because I had a hard time learning those patterns. And I think if I stuck with it and just continued to limit myself to one credit and say, no, I'm only going to use one credit, and every time I'm going to get just a little bit better, I'm going to figure out just a little bit more of this boss pattern or this stage so I don't die here where I keep dying. And really that's the way that I'm a little impatient and I don't always wait around for slow progress.
Yeah. One thing I can tell you that might offer you a little encouragement is kind of going back to my comparison to playing guitar is when you're first learning to play an instrument, it just sucks. Like, it's not even fun because you're just struggling the whole damn time and you look like an idiot and everyone's laughing at you and you're embarrassed and playing in front of your friends. But then once you kind of get the hang of it and you get that rush of, holy shit, I learned a song, it's like that with shmups where when you hit that wall and you hit it over and over and over, it just sucks. You're like, this isn't even fun. But then once you finally get through it, you get this rush of, holy shit, I can do this. And then playing shmups after that becomes way more fun as your skill increases and you're getting higher and higher challenges. It's hard to explain, but I guess it's like there'll come a point where you have like a breakthrough with the genre and with the game. And then after that, it's a lot more fun.
Yeah, I kind of experienced a little bit of that in that shmup competition that I was doing because when we were playing that first week, it was Gradius on the NES. And I hadn't picked that game up in a while, but I found a groove pretty quickly with it, and I almost beat it. I got to either the last stage or the second to last stage.
Nice.
I had a very good run of that thing where I got my highest score, and I felt pretty accomplished. But then, of course, once I put it away and went on to the other games and then went back to it later in the month to see if I could beat my score, I'd kind of lost that rhythm.
Yeah.
But, it was a really kind of triumphant feeling at the time to do that and kind of get that far with it. And so really, yeah, for me, I just need to stick with it and not put a game away when I'm getting frustrated with it. Like I say, maybe put it away for now, play something easier or less frustrating and then go back to it later, but not 6 months later, but maybe
Yeah.
a day or two later, so that I don't lose that rhythm and that muscle memory and
Yeah.
all of that kind of is necessary to be good at the genre, especially for myself, because I'm getting older now. I'm in my 40s, and so I don't have the hyper twitch reflexes I had when I was 20, and I was kind of getting starting to get into the genre more heavily.
Hmm. Yeah. And I mean, I've done that. I do that to this day. I think one thing I try to keep in mind is not all shmups are created equal. And certain ones that I really love, I will give that sort of attention to. But then there's others that I'll play, like maybe some of the Psycho games, where I hit that wall of difficulty and I'm just like, I don't like this game enough to really dedicate myself to battling it out more. But
Right. And two, I should probably also, change it up and do things like playing a shmup that is a different style, just to change it up and get a different perspective, or go back to something I know I can beat, so I can kind of build up that confidence,
yeah,
like
yeah.
like a Legendary Wings or a Dragon Spirit or a Blazing Lasers, something that I've one CC'd before. I know I could probably do again. Maybe take me a few days, ramp that back up, and kind of build back up that confidence, so that once I'm away from this other game for a few days that's frustrated me or whatever, then maybe I can refocus and go back to it with a little bit of a renewed confidence, because, well, yeah, I beat this other game, so maybe this one, is not so hard. I'm just banging my head against the wall instead of, getting a perspective on it and thinking, well, maybe I'm approaching this wrong.
Well, man, thanks for coming on the podcast. If there's anything else you want to talk about, that's fine. Or if not, thanks for being a guest. It was awesome talking to you.
Yeah, this has been great fun. I mean, I guess I would close by saying, make sure you check out my YouTube channel. Search for Game Boy Guru. I'm not big enough yet to have my own direct link channel. It's still the, garbled mess at the end.
That's fine.
But search for Game Boy Guru and look for the pixelated picture of my head in a Mario hat.
Nice.
I'm at Game Boy Guru on Twitter. And then, of course, I'm Fro on the Shmups forums. I'm Metal Fro on RF Generation. I have a Twitter account of that too, but it's less specifically gaming, and that's kind of my personal everything account: gaming, music, politics, whatever. But if for strictly gaming, at Game Boy Guru. And yeah, rfgeneration.com, great website for cataloging your games. I have a monthly column that I do. Like I said, sometimes it's an article, sometimes it's a YouTube video. And then, of course, I'm going to be doing this shmup playthrough. So for those of you who are either need to go through more of your collection or want to get involved just because of the fun, come join us over there and